Based on this little competition or experiment or whatever you want to call it, they would ultimately decide if the steam-powered turbine was worth using in the new Lusitania and Mauretania.
The Cunard Line decided to run this experiment with these two ships in January of 1905. What they did was they decided to have the Caronia have the traditional reciprocating engine, since that ship would be completed first. In fact, the Caronia would be ready to go just 1 month later, in February of 1905. However, its sister ship Carmania wouldn't be done until December of 1905. So, because this ship wasn't as far along in the construction process, it made this vessel the perfect candidate to receive the brand new steam-powered turbine. Although, even though the Cunard Line did have this plan in place, that did mean that they would have to wait nearly a year before they would ultimately decide if the steam-powered turbine was going to be used in the Lusitania and Mauretania.
Now, even though the Cunard Line did have to wait roughly a year before they could ultimately decide what type of engine to use in the Lusitania and Mauretania, they did not stop construction on these two ships during that time frame. Basically, what they did was they just had the construction teams work around the back part of the ship where the engines would go, and, they just tried to carry on as best they could. But the work definitely proceeded more slowly with the Lusitania and Mauretania throughout 1905, while they waited to find out what type of engine both of these ships would utilize.
Then, in December of 1905, the RMS Carmania was finally completed and ready to be put to sea. Once this vessel entered service, the Cunard Line wasted no time in testing the Carmania against its sister ship Caronia to see which ship would outperform the other. And, as expected, the Carmania outperformed the Caronia with its brand new steam turbine engine. So, with this experiment completed, the Cunard Line finally knew that the steam turbine engine would work in their new ships. So, they decided to put the steam turbine engine in the Lusitania and Mauretania, and construction could finally resume on these vessels at full speed. Once the Cunard Line decided on what engine both of these ships would use, it didn't take very long for the shipyard to finish work on the Lusitania and Mauretania's hull. The Lusitania was launched on June 7, 1906, and its sister ship Mauretania was only a few months behind. The Mauretania's hull was launched in September of 1906. So, with both of these vessels now in the water, work could begin on finishing out their interiors, getting all the funnels attached, and basically doing everything they needed to in order to turn the hull of both of these vessels into the beautiful transatlantic ocean liners that they were always destined to be.
Alright, so with everything that the Cunard Line has had to go through so far with the building of the Lusitania, surely, now that the vessel is in the water, and now that they've decided on what type of engine the ship is going to use, they've passed all the really difficult stuff with the Lusitania. It's going to be nothing but smooth sailing for the rest of the Lusitania and Mauretania's construction process, right? Well, you would be right, and you would be wrong at the exact same time. In terms of finishing up building the Lusitania, work would proceed rather smoothly. Although, when they finally got to the time period at which it was time to begin the Lusitania's sea trials, well, they would discover another major problem with the vessel that would have to be addressed before the Lusitania could head out on its maiden voyage.
Work on the Lusitania was completed in the summer of 1907. However, before this vessel went to undergo her official sea trials, the people at Cunard Line wanted the ship to go through a preliminary sea trial just to get a feel for what the vessel was capable of. This was because, where the ship had the brand new turbine engine, they wanted to see what the ship could do before she was officially judged, and deemed whether or not she was seaworthy enough to take on passengers.
Now, the Cunard Line decided to have this preliminary trial, or otherwise known as a builder's trial at the time, on July 27, 1907. And they invited people from the British Board of Trade, from the Admiralty, members of the Cunard Line staff, people from the shipyard. They invited all these people to come out and see how the Lusitania would perform on her first time out at sea. And for the most part, these preliminary trials went okay. The big highlight for the trial was when they accelerated the Lusitania to maximum speed. The vessel reached speeds of somewhere around 25 to 25.5 knots, which exceeded the British Admiralty's requirements for the speed requirements of the Lusitania. So this part of the trial was a big success. However, there was one big problem. When the Lusitania was operating at maximum speed, the vibrations generated by the steam turbine engines were so severe in the aft end sections of the ship, or at least in parts of the aft end section, that it made those spaces on the ship nearly uninhabitable. Basically, what this means was if you were in one of those back rooms of the ship when they accelerated the Lusitania up to full speed, you would be shaking like crazy as the Lusitania's engines were running. So As you can imagine, the people at Cunard Line weren't happy about this, and work would have to be done on these sections of the ship before the Lusitania could proceed on her maiden voyage.
However, the Cunard Line noticed that the vibration issues with the Lusitania were the worst when the ship was running at maximum speed. If they decreased the speed a bit while the vibrations weren't completely gone, they were more manageable. So, after the builder's trial was complete, before any work was done with the Lusitania, they were comfortable enough to invite a few VIP guests on board to have a bit of a shakedown cruise, so to speak. These VIP guests spent a couple of days on board the ship, and the Cunard Line wanted to see what they thought of the Lusitania. They also took this time to test the Lusitania under various speeds. However, they never got the ship up to her maximum speed to minimize the vibration issue. And this shakedown cruise went well, and the VIP guests departed the vessel on July 29, 1907. And then, right after they left, the official sea trials for the Lusitania began.
The Lusitania's official sea trials took place over a 3-day period. Now, one of the first things the Cunard Line did with members of the Board of Trade who came to check out the vessel was inform them about the vibration issue with the ship. The Board of Trade basically told them what you can expect. They needed to get that looked at before the Lusitania could head out on its maiden voyage. But besides the vibration issue, the sea trials for the Lusitania went perfectly. The ship was highly maneuverable, and believe it or not, when they did a full speed test with the Lusitania, they were able to get it to somewhere around 26 to 26.5 knots, which was incredible for the time. They even did a full-on stop test, which means they had the Lusitania travel at near full speed or at full speed, and then they told the engines to run at full astern to try to stop the ship as fast as they could, and believe it or not, they were able to stop the ship in somewhere around 4 minutes, which was incredible. The Lusitania was also highly maneuverable, and honestly, she passed the test with flying colors, minus the whole vibration issue. So, once the Board of Trade said, yep, the Lusitania is good, just get the vibration issue solved, Cunard Line took the Lusitania and had the ship head back to the shipyard, where they would try to get the vibration issue addressed. And then, after that, the Lusitania was free to head out on its maiden voyage.
When the Lusitania returned to the shipyard, what the Cunard Line did in order to try to minimize the vibrations of the vessel was to add more steel beams and arches to the back end section of the Lusitania. However, in order to do this, they had to take apart entire second-class spaces on board the ship and then rebuild them. Now, they were successful in adding these steel beams and arches, and it did help with the vibrations some. However, they did not completely go away. And the whole process of trying to minimize the Lusitania's vibrations and deal with it was something that the Cunard Line would continue to work on throughout the rest of the Lusitania's career.
So, once the shipyard was finished working on the RMS Lusitania's stern section, the Cunard Line was more than ready to finally take possession of the Lusitania and have it travel on its maiden voyage. The Cunard Line planned to have the Lusitania's maiden voyage occur on September 7, 1907. The ship was going to travel from Liverpool all the way to New York City, and the Cunard Line hoped that when the Lusitania finally headed out to sea with passengers for the first time, this would signal in the beginning of a new era, an era at which Cunard Line would finally be known as the world's greatest steamship company.
स्मिता आओ बेसो बेसो
क्या बात है, स्कार्फ में भी पहचान लिया।
वो फेस पैक में भी पहचान